Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inlay Terms. I am your host, Payman Ascari, and we have back with us a recurring guest, Mr. Harrison Burckart. Harrison,
Hello,
how are you?
I'm doing okay, and I hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah,
Hope we're all.
I'm in good health, and I can't complain. The holiday season is upon us.
Oh, that's good.
So, Harrison, let's see. It's been a minute since we last talked. Last time we talked, you were talking about government without taxation.
Yes.
And why don't you give us, first of all, how's your schooling going?
Well, so far it's going well. I'm in my final semester at Duquesne University right now, and that seems to be going well. I just took my last final, but I still have a few T's to cross and I's to dot, so that'll be my next few days until I actually walk the stage. But so far, I'd say things are going okay.
No, that's good to hear. We were talking backstage, and you mentioned that you were. What were you mentioning? You're upset with the funding, the endowments, something.
Oh, okay. I'll explain. I'm upset with the amount of cuts that within the government because I think there aren't enough in the United States government, and Canada certainly has its own share of waste too. I'm sure that if you look into the balance sheet, a lot of that stuff shouldn't be there. But I still think that the climate, first of all, the political climate has shifted in such a way where I think these endowments would be more acceptable once people realize what they are. And as people are wanting to find new solutions in the government, because the more people look at what's going on, the more frustrated they get. These endowments could offer a great plan in a way where take power, they take the power away from government to increase the budget or to allocate resources to places they shouldn't be allocated because it would all be set in advance in a transparent endowment fund. So that I think the climate is here, and I think the more frustrated people get with the current system, and the more developed this new system becomes, the more accepting people will be of it.
For the audience, maybe they don't fully understand what an endowment is.
Gladly.
It's basically the donations over the years to the universities, and it's tax free. Is that what it is?
Uh, yes. So endowment, it's a structure within charities where donations are put into a fund, and instead of all that money being spent at once, that money is invested into a plan, and then there's a dividend that the charity gets every year to actually spend, and the endowment is money that they just have. And the fund would be these funds within the government, they would be structured kind of like this because there'd be no taxes and it would be a very similar structure. And then it would also mimic retirement accounts, which I have a finance background, so I understand not everyone watching would, so I'll explain what that is. A retirement account a lot is when the money you've accumulated over the years, let's say it's $1 million for simplicity's sake, you put that into a retirement fund, and within the current market, the growth would be 10% a year. That's what's accepted. And say you withdrew 4%. So in theory, you'd be gaining money every year despite living off of that 40,000. And that's essentially how these funds would be structured. Say it takes $100 million a year to maintain something essential. You could, instead of raising that money every year, you could take, let's call it $5 billion. You could put it into an endowment fund like that, and then withdrawal rate of 4%, and then you can calculate the withdrawal rate out to get the money that you need every year. So and then the upside of this is you're also making money because you have it invested into this endowment fund. So over the years, the percentage that you allocated to be withdrawn increases if you want it to. And eventually, as you need to expand whatever that service is, you can within the constraints of that. Sorry, I hope I
So,
explained it.
no, you did. You did a great job. Where does the money originally come from? Do you have to go to the taxpayers and say, everybody hand over $5,000?
Uh, you wouldn't have to tax anybody more than they're already being taxed. Instead, it would have to be set up in such a way where the corruption and waste within government is being taken out. That's why that's so essential for a number of other reasons, but also for this. And you could honestly just reallocate the money, and through both that reallocation and restructuring the government to be smaller, you can just take the base amount every year until you have enough allocated so that the funds will sustain themselves into perpetuity. And then nobody has to be taxed anymore. Hopefully,
Okay, let's take a concrete example. Let's take public education. Let's say it costs, again, for simplicity's sake, $1 billion a year to run the public education system, and right
okay.
now it's being funded through taxpayer money. So the
Okay.
taxpayer money, the citizens are taxed. The money is given to the executive government, executive branch, and then they disperse it to the public education. What you're saying is instead it should go into a fund, and that fund should generate a revenue, and that revenue is released directly to public education.
Well, the public education would be funded through the fund, and I'll explain it this way. Say you had, instead of that $1 billion a year having to allocate that with taxpayer dollars every year, you could instead take $50 billion, which on a government scale really is achievable, and that you wouldn't have to have any more taxes than you already have. And you could then put it into an investment portfolio, whether that it could be stocks, real estate, anything. It would just be like a typical hedge fund. It wouldn't get any special treatment in that sense, other than there wouldn't be any taxes. And instead of having to liquidate or having to do anything like that, you could have yourself paid a dividend every year through the fund. And even, let's say it's a 2% dividend for simplicity's sake, there's your $1 billion. So you get that every single year, and it's in a way that's growing. And obviously 50 billion is, when you do the math, the standard withdrawal rate of 4%, it's obviously twice as much as you would need to get your $1 billion a year. However, the funds should have a little bit more than that so that it would just be super secure and you're good to go no matter what.
Now I'm just now almost like trying to irritate you here, but would you
Oh,
imagine, would there be multiple different funds, like one for public education, one for healthcare, one for
yeah.
pensions,
Yeah.
or
100.
would you just have? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can finish if you'd like.
No, I mean,
But
like, would you have a
I,
dedicated fund for every service, or would you have one massive one and then give the money back to the people and say, spend it wherever you like?
well, I'm in favor of as many little funds as possible, because I believe if you have huge funds, then not only that really doesn't eliminate the problem of corruption and waste, it just puts it into a different place. So let's take that example where you need $1 billion a year and you had a fund. Instead of having one $50 billion fund, say you had one 100, $500,000 funds, or sorry, I don't know if the math is right on top of my head, but you split it up into 100 ways, and then each local place can just get what it needs from that fund. That way, you don't have the government conglomerate telling people what they need to spend, or you don't have the money wasted on a bunch of administrators. Just keep it as small as possible, and it could be managed by like local financial advisors in that area, or local financial institutions, whatever the preference would be. Honestly, just whoever's the best, whoever's the most qualified. So it could be localized through splitting it up into smaller funds, and that's just, and the fund structure really doesn't change. You just obviously have less money in each and more of them. And it's completely privatized in the sense that private businesses are managed, or private financial businesses are managing it just like they'd manage other people's money. And they obviously can't touch it, just like they can't touch their clients' money. So that's taken care of. Hopefully, I'm making
Uh,
sense.
yeah, it does. The dividend from the fund, does it go back to the citizen, or does it go to the different departments?
Well, the dividend from the fund is meant to be the funding that taxation would provide. So, say the $1 billion dividend, or split up into however many dividends, however you structure it. Say if you spend all the money and you don't need any more, then that's great. If you're somehow over budget, then you need to cut some things. It would be like the private sector where you can't just be over budget, and that's okay. You'd have to cut some of the things. And then if you're under budget, the money could then just be reinvested into the fund so that next year the fund would grow even further. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, I can try again.
I'm just trying to get you, in your opinion, like what do you think would be better if the purpose of the fund was to fund the service, or is the purpose of the fund to provide a dividend to the citizen and then entrust the citizen to make their own decisions? Either way is fine.
Mm, Honestly, I think later on you could have multiple funds doing both. But early on, I think the fund should just provide the service because if you're not taxing anybody, then and you're not giving it or you're not assigning a bunch of other fees, then that is already paying the would be taxpayer. So it's better to just have those essential services available. When I say essential, I mean like truly essential, like actual roads and hospitals and such. Then just having those funded into perpetuity is better for them, in my opinion. So I'd say the purpose of the dividend should be to fund the services.
It almost sounds like the fund, the government then becomes the bank. So the people give like the initial seed investment, and then the government would give out loans, right? Like the fund. This is what a bank does when you have a fund or a fund manager. They take your money and they invest it in other companies and initiatives. Is that accurate?
I can see what you're saying. I mean, I'm sure there could be programs set up in that way where people who want this could give the initial seed capital and earn a earn a little bit of repayment because the fund would obviously make money. But I would say not really because the fund would just the fund isn't actually restructuring government. The fund is just there so that the government that is has less power in the sense that it cannot determine how much money is being allocated to these things, and it cannot steal from the taxpayers in order to somehow allocate more to this thing because what you need is already there and will be there forever. So it has less to do with reshaping government and more to do with giving the government that does exist less power through transferring the power to the citizens through the fact that there's a fund that can never be touched and just funds it. But I suppose there could be ways to do that in the future where that's how you raise the money. People could give the initial seed and then they get it back plus a few percentage points. Obviously, the fund would have to keep some, but the people could make some money doing that. But no, it has nothing to do with actually restructuring the government.
So the questions I'm asking, I'm not pushing back. I'm just
No, no,
I'm interested. Um,
that's okay.
this fund, would it fall under the executive branch, the legislative, or are you imagining it's fully independent?
Um, I suppose there could be say in where the fund is in where the say education. I suppose there could be say in what's important within education, but I would imagine that the fund is not an independent branch, but independent in the sense that the people have more say in what's going on through the fund being completely transparent and the fund being much more localized than the government. So whichever branch of government wanted to say whatever they wanted to say about where the money should go, they can do that. And the people would have control over the fund in the sense that they could determine where the dividend is, like the locality. And that ultimately they would have the most power. So it would be independent in that sense, but not an independent agency like the Federal Reserve. We don't want to do that.
Right. Well, the Federal Reserve is private. What I meant is, you're right. That's that's a different
Yeah.
problem. Um, would it fall under the IRS or the Department of the Treasury, or would it be something co-equal, like how you have the Supreme Court, the legislature? You would create a fourth branch.
It would be something else entirely. And I don't know if there would have to be a fourth branch. It would just be the source of funds rather than changing the way government is made. The only reason I'm saying it would take away power from the government we have now is just because it would naturally do that through them not having control over the funds anymore. But no, there wouldn't have to be a fourth branch or anything like that. It would just be a different source of funds that would replace taxpayer dollars. And I suppose it could replace the IRS and everything like that, because if you're not taxing people, you don't need an IRS anymore. So you could just have people in charge of making sure the fund is allocated to where it needs to go. But obviously that could get bad too. You need to be very careful with the way you structure things. So there wouldn't need to be a fourth branch of government. It would be more independent than that. Hopefully I'm making sense.
Oh, you are. Here's a follow-up question for you. Is this any different from a sovereign wealth fund? If so, how not?
It is similar, but there are differences. A sovereign wealth fund, it's money that the government has, and it's just kind of there invested. It's not necessarily replacing taxpayer dollars. It's just kind of a reserve that's there, and that's not a bad thing to have. We could still have a sovereign wealth fund and do this, but these would not be a sovereign wealth fund in the sense that instead of just being extra money that's off to the side, it's the money that through the dividends is meant to actually fund the things the government provides. Hopefully that makes sense.
So it's like you're taking the sovereign wealth fund and you're fusing it into the organs of government, like it's a primary funding source.
Yes, essentially. It's like a sovereign wealth fund, but it is the funding source. It's not just off to the side.
And with this, would you have like a department of fund management, or would you just outsource it to the banks, like private pension?
Honestly, there'd be a place for both. This department could work directly with the advisors and the institutions that you outsource to, and in that sense, there's the control is not in the hands of one party. So you could have this department that only oversees things and talks about what is needed and where, and you could have the actual management outsourced to local financial advisors managing the local funds of their area. So it could be a symbiotic relationship over time, but there's definitely a place for some department making sure this is managed, but you have to be very careful adding government departments, because the nature of them is they say they need more and more power until eventually they just replace the corrupt system that they were meant to eliminate. So there's a place. Sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. I thought you were done.
So it could be there, but yeah, in primary is outsourcing. That's what you'd have to do. But go ahead.
I guess my question would be, how do you prevent fraud? For example, if you become the president of the United States, and so in theory you run this department that manages the fund management, and then I sell Santa hats, and I know you've been on my podcast. Like, how do you prevent the money flowing illicitly?
Well, you ask a good question. That's why I'd say this should be outsourced to a lot of financial advisors and financial institutions, because there is already so much scrutiny within that industry that the advisor literally cannot touch a penny, with the exception of the 1% standard fee that he takes. So that you could eliminate the problem in that sense. And also, if the government really doesn't have much power or much access to the actual structure of the fund itself and the dividends, you'd have to see exactly what goes where, because the accounts could be set up in a way where those managing it absolutely need to see what's going on, and it would need to be completely transparent. That's part of it. So it would be complex, but it is achievable through making sure that it's regulated through what's already in the financial industry, keeping it transparent so that people can see it, and making sure that no matter what's going on, how the dividend payments are spent needs so many receipts that there's just no way to have corruption within this system.
And
Hopefully that
I'm
makes sense.
guessing the primary motivation for where to invest the funds would be profit. So wherever, whether it's I don't know, Nvidia or gold or oil, whatever generates the most profit, that's where you would invest.
Yes. So that it wouldn't be, hey, invest in my company or corrupt in that sense. It would just be whoever's the most profitable, no matter who's running that thing or what's going on. And obviously, you'd have to be, and if you'd have to be careful with people's money, you can't just gamble it on super risky stuff. But yes, profit would be the primary motive
Okay.
for the.
Here's another tough question. Well, I don't know, you're a smart guy, but it's tough for me. How would you ease into this? So let's say let's go back to public education. You're
Right.
taxing people a round number, $100 billion, and you're paying 100 billion for public education. Would you say, all right, the first year we're going to tax people $101 billion, and we're going to give 100 billion to the education system, but 1 billion we're going to start investing in the fund? Like, would you ease into that transition, or would the government print a billion and put it in the fund?
Well, I suppose there would be easing, but not in the sense of taxing people more. The first step would be to determine how much of that $100 billion is actually necessary. Because you and I both know there's so much bloat within the current education system of both America and Canada that we could probably eliminate 30% of the education budget without really, I don't want to say without really trying, but it would be very easy to do that. How many administrators are really necessary? How many teachers are really doing the best they can do? And you could just go down the list in that way. So let's say you were able to take that $100 billion budget and you decreased it so much that now you only have to spend $50 billion to get a leaned out version of that education system. What I'm suggesting is we don't just stop allocating $100 billion right away. We instead take that 50 billion we're now saving and or that and we slowly invest it into the fund. Sorry, I might have been a little inconsistent with my numbers there, but I hope the concept is making sense. So you cut the fat, and then instead of reallocating right away, you take the difference and you slowly invest it into the fund until you have enough money.
So like Doge 2.0.
Sort of, yeah. It's like what Doge is trying to cut out the waste, and then Doge 2.0 would build these funds so that the money spent on these things for all the money spent on these things in the future would essentially be zero or net zero. Hopefully, I'm making
I
sense.
guess no, you are, but this might be going off track. But what do you think happened with Doge? Because I was really excited looking into the U.S. Starting in
Yeah.
January, and then they just sidelined Musk.
I don't know. I honestly have no idea what's going on there. I mean, I hope Elon meant what he was saying as far as cutting waste, and I hope Trump meant what he was saying as far as just letting that happen. But what's going on in the government right now, I wish I had any idea. I hope this administration is the one to actually do it. And if not, we need to focus on the future and find an administration that actually will. Because with Trump getting so many electoral votes in the last election and campaigning on a lot of this stuff, we've proven that the people actually want it. So over time, we just need to find people who will actually do it. I hope these are the people, but something I am aware of, Elon was a partial employee and he just ran out of days he's able to work. They'll be reset next year. So next month. And I suppose he could work 2 or 3 days a week, and those days would last all year, which would just mean he could serve out eternity in that role. So with obviously not eternity, but you know what I mean. I hope next year I'm correct in the prediction that he's going to come back and he's just going to work part-time so he doesn't waste his days. Because those first few months, he had to go in there and actually establish a department. Now he doesn't have to do that. So hopefully in 2026 things resume. That's really all I have to say about that.
I heard that the reason that they got rid of him is because Elon threatened to audit the Federal Reserve. They're like, gotta get this guy
Oh,
out now.
yeah, that's not good. That would be bad. Well, it would be very good for us, but it would be very bad for the Federal Reserve, which should probably just get disbanded at this point. But that's a whole other reason they don't want it audited.
So that's kind of leading into my, I guess, my final question. How would this threaten the monopoly? First of all, what is the Federal Reserve for the layperson, and what impact would your suggestion have on it?
Reserve, it's it is centralized. I know our monetary system that they issue the currency, they can just print as much as they want since there's no gold standard. They determine what's going on in the economy, like, in the sense that interest rates, they essentially just control everything from their ivory tower instead of it being localized. And once you get into the specifics of that, it can get a little more complex, but that's essentially what's going on with the Federal Reserve is they control the American economy. And the way that was able to happen is they did it through taking advantage of crises. For example, the Great Depression, which I believe was the market was manipulated in such a way where it could result in the Great Depression. That's when a lot of these things started happening. It was in the early 1930s as a result of the Depression. So the market was manipulated. The people thought it just happened, so they were afraid, and that then the Federal Reserve could come in, and the Federal Reserve has been in power ever since.
So, I mean, you could say that if you had this sort of wealth fund, it would threaten the Federal Reserve's power because they can't create these crises, they can't control the money supply as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Because the wealth fund, there would be certain rules to the wealth fund. One of them being that the principal can never be withdrawn, and the way you get the dividend is if the fund is profitable, then you get your dividend, and some could be left liquid so that only the dividend could be taken out. But you never touch the principal; you only touch the dividend. And why that's essential, you can't have the equivalent of whatever the Federal Reserve would be, just selling everything in the fund to crash the market, getting the people scared, and then creating another Federal Reserve. It would be locked in there, which means there'd be more stability within the markets. There would be a steady stream of investors no matter what the economic cycle is, because there's obviously this much money going around in these funds. And there would just be a layer of security, obviously through guaranteeing these services into perpetuity. You have one, but there'd be another layer of security in the sense that that if you have this amount of money in the market, this amount can never be touched. So the fluctuation is this instead of this, which makes people want to invest more, which just makes the entire economy run better because people feel more secure about what's going on. Hopefully that's a good analysis of it.
No, it is. Um, when would you grow the principal? I mean, would you grow it as the population grows? Would you grow it as the economy grows? How would you manage that?
Well, the plan would be for the principal to just grow naturally, and this, as long as the fund is well invested, you can just keep on putting the money. You can just keep the money in the fund. You don't even have to keep on doing anything, and you just keep and whatever the dividend is, you could just increase it in the sense that it's a certain percentage of the fund, no matter how much the fund is. So you could, so as the population increases, as a bunch of other things happen, you obviously spend more of that dividend. And the reason it could be set up, it could be set up so that if you're under budget, you just reinvest it. Then obviously, as the population and everything would grow, your expenses would increase. So you would just spend the entire dividend, and that's how it would be set up.
I'm
Is
just
that
trying to
does that
think
make
how this would work. So you And you and me and our generation, this generation invests $10 billion in the education fund, and
Right.
then 3 generations later, your great great grandchildren, are they still living off of that $10 billion, or does the 10 billion grow into a trillion? How does that work?
Uh, they would be living off the money. I don't know if it would grow into a trillion, but it would be significantly more than 10 billion in the sense that say you say you're withdrawing let four is standard. I've used two. Let's cut in the middle and say you withdraw three. So the standard growth rate is 10. You withdraw three. So the standard growth rate of the fund would be 7. If your fund is growing 7% into perpetuity, you're quickly going to multiply your money. And if we're talking money that's not going to be touched for several generations, that 10 billion could easily turn into 100 billion or even much more by the time grandchildren are around.
And what
So
would happen
instead of you having
if
to put more in,
what would happen if in three
oh, Mister,
generations that so you had 10 billion principal, it's generating $1 billion a year, which covers the education revenue. In 3 generations, that 10 billion goes to a trillion. It's generating 100 billion a year. You only need 10 billion for education. That 90 billion, does it go towards the principal? Do you just give a dividend back to the taxpayer? What happens?
well, whatever's left, I mean, the dividend, I would say that whatever you don't spend on what it's supposed to be, you just reinvest it into the fund so that future funding is secured no matter what. But if it's more money than you could ever need for education, there could be talks about taking some of the money out and putting it into different funds, or even as education changes, you could split the fund into more things because say there's, for example, let's say there's a path for the kids going to college, and let's say there's a path for the kids who just want to go to trade school. You could split the fund up that way. And if there's more money than any education system could ever need, you could take some of the funds out and allocate the funds to different areas. And if there's no funding needed anywhere else, because this would probably happen with every other fund too, because it wouldn't be able to be touched, then you could just pay a dividend back to the would be taxpayers. So it
This is
honestly
kind of
just
like
depends
a
on circumstances.
it's kind of like a UBI, except instead of taxing the rich and giving to the poor, you're actually generating wealth and you're allowing people to live off of that wealth.
Suppose I'd say it's different in the sense that you're just getting this money allocated for a specific service, and as a would-be taxpayer, you own that service and have some rights to it. And then the dividends, I would say that doesn't really have much to do with a UBI because they're really not guaranteed. They would be meant to be something else. Like they're just there if you get them. It's like any other. It's like any investing into any corporation. So I suppose you, in a practical sense, yeah, you'd be able to enrich people this with excess funds, but that really wouldn't be the primary purpose of anything. Where a UBI just takes funds and redistributes them. This would just take excess funds and pay dividends to the people that would be paying into the service. It's like a reward for them doing this. Sorry, I hope I'm making sense.
No, you are. I'm just thinking, like in practical terms, we are redesigning the funding mechanism of government from being one where the taxpayers fund government to one where the economy, the transactions, the commodities, as
Yes,
that's what funds it, and as long as that's growing, then this model will function.
right. And that does mean you have economy going. Am I still with you?
Yeah, yeah. There's some connection issues, but I
Are you
can hear
still
you.
there?
I'm here.
Uh, I think we've
Harrison.
lost connection. Yes,
Yeah, there's some
I
connection issues. Can you
I'm
hear
still
me?
here. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm not sure what's going on. I've got Wi-Fi and everything, but
It could be from my end. It's windy
I
over here.
this just happens sometimes. Oh, okay. Yeah, and our weather isn't perfect either. We just got some snow. But
Fun.
yeah, this but where were we before?
I guess we have connection issues, so we can end it. But the last question was, we're changing the funding mechanism from being from the taxpayers to being from the economy and the growth of the economy.
Hmm. Yes, you would. And the way you I'm sure some people are going to be worried about that because how do we know the economy is going to keep going? And the way to do that, we honestly just have to leave people alone and let them live their lives. And what do I mean by that? If people aren't being taxed, then they have more disposable income, so they might have to eat, they might buy a car, they might upgrade their house, whatever it is. Just natural things would boost the economy that way. And you have like this, and obviously you have to have a government that doesn't regulate everything. That's a whole other issue. But you could just have a government that provide by just providing this at no real expense to the taxpayer. Then you're just enriching your citizens and you're keeping the economy vibrant in that way. So these funds they would create the economic stimulation that they would need to actually do what they need to do. But yes, that's essentially what it is.
All right, Harrison, I'm all out of questions, and we're having some connection issues. So
Yeah, that's not
I
good. Of
guess, yeah, no, it's okay. We can end it. I mean, we've gone almost
course.
40 minutes, and it was rapid fire. You answered a lot of questions.
Thank
Do
you.
you
Yeah,
do you want to maybe let the audience know where they can follow you?
sure. Well, you can follow me on X. My handle's right down there. And I also have Instagram. I rarely post on Instagram, but my account does exist. Just look up Harrison Burckart and you'll find me. And I do have a Facebook account too. The same situation as Instagram. I almost never post on there. I just kind of have an account. But just look up Harrison Burckart and you'll find me. So those are the only real places. And I talk a lot about this with my upcoming graduation. After I cross my T's, I'll be talking a lot more about this. So it's definitely something worth following me to see. And I'm I'd love to see this goes. Yeah, stick around with me. There's my handle there, and hopefully I'll be back on here. That's up to payment. And here we are. But yeah,
Sounds good, Harrison. I
that's
wish you the best of luck with your graduation, and hopefully you'll make your way into the Trump administration and implement some of these policies.
thank you. I appreciate that, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Harrison. You take care, and goodbye to the audience as well.
You as well, and